Maybe the most anticipated Harvey's hot takes in its long and illustrious history. We get to hear from our friend Bryan Hayes on the Mitch Marner situation. Just a bizarre weekend, as you know, Bryan, which starts with our friend Chris Johnston reporting that the Leafs asked Marner to waive his no-move clause. And the weekend ends with Brad Treliving calling just a bizarre impromptu presser where he said he was behind the player 1,000%. And then he took one question and left. The whole thing has been very strange. But, Bryan, you have a theory about why the Leafs approached Marner about moving his no-move clause. You have the floor now to explain that theory.
Yeah, I believe it was ultimately a bluff, Jay. I think it was a bluff by the Leafs to try and get Mitch Marner to open negotiations. And the reason I say that, and the reason I believe that, is because I find it hard to believe, if not impossible to believe, Brendan Shanahan and Brad Treliving didn't know what Mitch Marner's answer was going to be before they went to ask him to waive that no-trade clause. And the reason I say that is because they are control freaks like every other executive in pro sports. Right? It's like what lawyers are taught in law school. Don't ever ask a question unless you know what the answer is going to be. And I think that applies here as well. I think this front office in Toronto desperately wants to sign Mitch Marner. I think they have been pushing him and prodding him. And I think Marner and his camp made the decision last offseason, this is my viewpoint, this is my read on the situation, to basically say, we're not negotiating, we're not waiving, and we're going to play it out, which is his right to do because he has a no-movement clause and because he's a Maple Leaf. And I think Shanahan and Treliving are finally getting to a point where they're getting nervous that this guy actually might leave, and they don't want that to ever be a reality. And this has been the case for a long, long time. And it really begins and ends at the desk of Brendan Shanahan. He's the president of this team. Every major move that happens with this team falls on his desk and ultimately will be his decision. And he was there at the draft floor in 2014 when they drafted William Nylander, in 15 when they drafted Mitch Marner, in 2016 when they drafted Austin Matthews, and he was in the building when they all started their career together in Ottawa that night when Matthews scored 4 and they lost in overtime. And I believe Shanahan's philosophy since that first game has been that these three guys, Matthews, Nylander, and Marner, will be Leafs for life. They're going to rewrite the record books. Their jerseys are going into the rafter. They're going to be a part of Legends Row. And hopefully they also win a Stanley Cup or two along the way. But as of now, playoff success appears to be irrelevant. And I think that's also an element to this, Jay, when it comes to them poking and prodding and bluffing and trying to push Marner into a situation where he negotiates, because you can make the case for why you'd want Mikko Rantanen. Every team in the league would want Rantanen. He's a great player, right? And that would also continue the philosophy of having a core four and having a top-heavy salary cap. If you got Rantanen for Marner in this circumstance and signed him to a long-term deal at big money, then you'd be paying him a lot, Matthews a lot, Nylander a lot, Tavares a lot. That philosophy would continue. But again, I don't believe they ever thought Mitch Marner would waive. And why would he? Why would they think he would? He's in the final year. He's having a career year. He's comfortable here. By all accounts, he still wants to be here. We'll get to that momentarily. He's also expecting a child, I believe, in the next 2 to 3 months, he and his wife. So he's got a young family that's developing. There's a lot of different things that are at play here that would lead me to believe the Leafs would know he's not going to uproot his life. So again, it comes to a point where it's a bluff to try to push him into thinking, okay, maybe the Leafs have other ideas. Maybe they have other options. Let's end this silly business and let's start negotiating and let's work out a deal. And I think Marner called their bluff and said, I'm not waiving. And as of now, he's saying, I'm not negotiating either.
Bryan, Marner might be one of the most polarizing star players in Toronto sports history, in any sport. One of our star crew members, I love this, and I'm not going to name him, but one of our star crew members admitted that while he knows Marner is at minimum their second best player, and he knows that Marner makes the team better, he also doesn't want Marner to stick around Toronto long term, which seems absurd to me. Why is Mitchell Marner so divisive among this fan base, in your opinion?
Because he's from Toronto and he grew up a Leaf fan. That to me is at the crux of all of this in terms of him being polarizing. Now, it can go deeper than that in a couple of different ways, and I'll get to that momentarily. But Leaf fans have always looked at their own. players that are from the Greater Toronto Area or from Southern Ontario that grew up as Leaf fans, they've always looked at those players, and I think they've always looked at Mitch Marner as believing that he should know better in terms of messing with the emotions of a fan base, taking for granted how lucky you are to be a Maple Leaf. You're living out that dream. And I think they hold him to a different standard than they do Austin Matthews or William Nylander. Again, because he's from Toronto and because he was a Leaf fan, and Leaf fans believe he should know better. And what do I mean by that? Austin Matthews grew up in Arizona. He didn't grow up dreaming of being a Maple Leaf. He didn't grow up in Toronto or the Greater Toronto Area understanding the history of the team. I'm not sure if you went up to Austin right now and just referenced Gretzky high stick, if he'd even know what that means. Right. I don't even know if he'd know what that means.
Right.
Mitch Marner would know what that means. Mitch Marner could tell you exactly what Gretzky high stick means. He'd mention Kerry Fraser, Game 6 in LA. He'd tell you it all. From Toronto, Leaf fan, grew up here, lived it, experienced it. Same thing with William Nylander. Willie didn't grow up in Toronto. He didn't grow up dreaming of being a Leaf fan. His dad played all over the league. He never played here, never played in Toronto. I'm not sure if you go to William Nylander and you say, who'd the Leafs lose to in the conference final in '02? Mitch Marner will say Jeff O'Neill and the Carolina Hurricanes. Marner knows it. He lived it. He's from here. He's held to a different standard because of that. Fairly or unfairly, reasonably or unreasonably, I think Leaf fans and people from the Greater Toronto Area look at him and say, why are you messing with this team with negotiations like he did 6 years ago? Right, where he held out. He didn't show up to camp on time. There were rumors that he was going to possibly explore offer sheets when he was a restricted free agent. And he demanded and got ultimately more money than other players within his bubble in terms of comparisons did league-wide, like Braden Point down in Tampa, Mikko Rantanen, sure enough, in Colorado. And now you look at it, and it appears as if it's going to possibly happen again. That Marner's not. Is he committed? Is he not? Does he want to be a Leaf? Is he going to hold their feet to the fire and demand the most money and a structure in terms of term that's very unique to Toronto and take advantage of the fact that the Leafs want to keep him? And I think Leaf fans really do take that personally, and they look at Marner and say, why would you do that? Why would you go down that road? You should know better. You're from here and you were a Leaf fan. And then beyond that, you look at just the whole core of the team and the structure of the team and the fact that they haven't won anything. And that's not solely Mitch Marner's fault, obviously. But the fact of the matter is this core, Matthews, Nylander, Marner in particular, this is their 9th season together. They've been to the playoffs 8 times. They've won 1 playoff round. And I think Leaf fans are they're just done with all this. They're frustrated by it. And Nylander negotiated during the season last year and got his deal done. Matthews signed a year before he became a free agent. And it's Marner again who's allowing it to be loud. And there's uncertainty of whether or not he's going to stick around. And I think a lot of Leaf fans are just looking at it and saying, how did we get to this point? You guys have been treated like gods here. The organization has treated you so well, and you haven't repaid the fan base in terms of playoff success. You haven't won anything. So it's a deeply rooted, multi-layered conversation, and it's very unique to Mitch Marner. But that's what's led to this polarization. And we'll see what happens the rest of this season. We'll see what happens come playoff time. We'll see what happens with the contract negotiation. But the story of Mitch Marner is truly a roller coaster. It's a Shakespearean novel. And we'll see how many more chapters are there in terms of the Toronto story. But it's something that every Leaf fan is fascinated by, and they have been ever since they drafted him.
So my final question for you is, I'd love you to put a percentage on the chance that you think Mitchell Marner will be a Toronto Maple Leaf next season.
I'd still say 70%. I think it's 70% that he wants to stay here, that the Leafs want him to be here. I think the 30%, if he's going to leave, it's because ultimately he will make a decision that he doesn't want to do it anymore, that he doesn't want to live here anymore, that he doesn't want to go through it. It is a fishbowl. There is a lot of pressure. I might have this perception that he's treated differently, like I just said, and it's just too much to live up to. And ultimately, that's what it's going to come down to, because I don't believe for a second it'll be about money, Jay, because I think the Leafs, they have proven this countless times in the past. When it comes to Marner, Nylander, Matthews, they will pony up. They'll pay him whatever he's going to want. They'll give him whatever term he's going to want. I believe that in the end. I think they're showing their cards. They're dying to negotiate with this guy, especially before the playoffs, because they're worried if it goes awry again and they lose in the first round and he doesn't play well, all hell's going to break loose here. So they're trying to make his life easier. I think ultimately they'll give in to whatever he wants. I think it's going to come down to his lifestyle choices. Where does he want to live? Where does he want to be a pro athlete? If it's here, he'll get every dollar he wants. If it's somewhere else, he's not going to get nearly as much money, in my opinion, especially when you consider endorsements and everything that comes with being a Maple Leaf legend. So I'd say 70%, as it currently stands, Mitch Marner will be a Maple Leaf well beyond this season.
I'd say there was a 100% chance this is going to be a good segment, and I was absolutely right, because when there's tumultuous times in Leafland, it's always a fun edition of Harvey's Hot Takes with my guy, Bryan Hayes.
Hot Takes is presented by Harvey's. Customize your burger and get it delivered from our app to your door. Harvey's, it's a beautiful thing.